Welcome back to the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where like Kirk Herbstreit, we have no opinions about anything. I am Brendon, Kleen, a staff writer at Awful Announcing. That has been Axelrod. He is a senior editor at Awful Announcing. Back at you with a lot to talk about in the world of football, as well as the top of ESPN, where Stephen A. Smith gets a new deal at long last. We'll also talk about ESPN and their college football playoff announcement show, as well as Netflix finalizing, finally, its NFL broadcast teams on Christmas Day. But let's get to our instant replay, Ben, where what has kind of been the sports media story of 2024 that has just been sort of in the background and tucked behind a lot of the news that has gone on finally came to a conclusion as Stephen A. Smith gets 5 years, around $20 million annually is kind of the closest that I think has been put out there. Maybe there's some different elements that could make that go up or down, but that nice round number of 100 certainly sounds good for him. Sounds like Disney, ESPN, and ESPN Bet are each kind of chipping in to get him to that total, and he'll be able to contribute across coverage of NBA and NFL at ESPN, non-sports stuff at Disney. He's kind of been the figurehead of the ESPN Bet stuff. I don't really pretend to know how that can operate as its own company and what that even means, but we'll leave it to them to figure that part of it out. Just off the top, what was your reaction to the number, to some of the details we have gotten, and just this whole thing coming to a close before it even really got too far down the rabbit hole? His contract's not even up till next summer.
Yeah, I think that what stood out to me was the lack of clarity and the lack of details that were available. I mean, we don't even know who's paying out this contract, right? And so the stuff, it seems like this has been a trend when it comes to ESPN talent and contract negotiations, is they give you these big releases, and this is one we haven't even gotten a release on, but the details or what they're calling details are out there. And they kind of get muddied up. It's like, well, some of it's coming from ESPN Bet, some of it's going to be related to ESPN Plus. And I guess I just thought we'd have a little bit more clarity because Stephen A. Smith is such a big star. And you'd think like you wouldn't want to just announce him for these vague projects. You'd want to actually like put some oomph behind it and kind of get the ball rolling on that. So I think that's what stood out, is considering that we don't have the official announcement yet, or it at least seems like this thing's at least far down the road that we can assume it is in fact happening. But the fact that we don't have those details about who's paying it, what, the streaming projects mean, what the first look deal means, I think that's what stands out to me.
Yeah, I saw it referenced that, didn't Stephen A. already have basically a first look deal at Disney? I mean, how official something like that is, maybe it can be varied by person, but he did, as a producer, the debate docuseries for ESPN Plus this past year. He obviously had the fill-in opportunity on Jimmy Kimmel's show. He, I guess like even to the General Hospital role he had, that's an ABC property. So the idea that, like, again, the vagueness of what that necessarily even means is very much there. And you couple it with, no major, Stephen A. is joining the Monday Night Countdown panel, or Stephen A. will have a recurring role on Inside the NBA, or I mean, whatever it could have been, and maybe we'll still get there, but a lot of reporters have chipped in with details on this thing now that makes me feel like I'm not sure that's coming.
The other thing is ESPN Bet is like not a winning property right now. Like ESPN Bet is kind of ESPN's redheaded stepchild. It's something where they basically are leasing out the name. It's, from a market share standpoint, it's not like making a huge dent in the sports gambling ecosystem. So I think that part of it is a little interesting, because it doesn't seem like this is something where, we want Stephen A. Smith on ESPN Bet because it's good for Stephen A. Smith. It's good for ESPN Bet. It almost seems like this is like what they needed to do to get the deal done.
Maybe, but like, what does Stephen A. Smith even contributing to ESPN Bet mean? It's not like there's a show. I mean, they do have like a daily wager show on ESPN Plus. I don't imagine he's going to be, hosting that thing anytime soon or appearing on it. like I said, if you find the ads that he's done on YouTube, like he's definitely the front man, but so is Mike Greenberg. And honestly, Pat McAfee has played a little bit of a role. They do ad reads and kind of sponsorship, quote unquote, types of things on First Take for ESPN Bet. But like, again, I can understand that, but the idea, like you're saying, that is some major part of this contract feels like a reach. Honestly, it might be a nice PR hit for them to say that ESPN Bet can pay him some money more than anything he's actually going to provide for them.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's just a matter of that's like how they have to pull together the money to meet this $20 million a year figure. That's kind of how it feels to me, because like you said, like, what does that mean? He's already the front man for it. I don't know if that will mean like we'll get more of Stephen A's parlays or whatever that means, or how valuable that would even be.
Not to mention, he already has a Prize Picks deal with his podcast, so he competes with ESPN Bet, which is the last part of this deal that we didn't hit on, which is that it is non-exclusive outside of sports, which he had been insistent upon in his public comments to the extent that he gave any, which he was pretty mum on this whole thing. And the podcast deal will remain independent. I think that's what you were going to say. He already presents an opposing sponsorship deal in that independent side of what he's doing now. So it's even more confusing.
What did you make of the podcast? Because that was the other part, was when these negotiations, I mean, look, over the course of the last 2 years or however many years, Stephen A. Smith has really built up the Stephen A. Smith show, which is something he pays for out of pocket. And I think my read on it and most people's reads on it was probably like, this is his negotiating chip. Like, this is something that he can have in his back pocket. It can be a fallback plan. It can be something he can sell to ESPN or more likely lease to ESPN. But it's really like not involved in this deal whatsoever, right? Like it seems like he's probably just going to keep doing his podcast on the side, which is not connected to ESPN, which that part of it was surprising. I thought at a minimum, we would get some sort of news, and maybe that's still coming, that he would be leasing that show to ESPN or to the flagship app or to whatever it is. I was really surprised that's not a part of the deal.
I would agree, but I also feel that the podcast, the content, that's not ESPN. I mean, he is having legitimate deep dive political and kind of social issue types of conversations, even more so than what you would say maybe a Pat McAfee is doing or anything like that. Like, it's a legitimate news talk show. Right. And so where does that fit? Maybe Disney, maybe some sort of ABC or one of their other cable networks, just to put it somewhere as part of a bigger deal. I could honestly see that more so than it being folded into anything ESPN related. So maybe that is kind of part of the vagueness around the Disney side of this deal, is that there's an opportunity there. He did sign an iHeartMedia contract for sales and distribution of the podcast. I believe it started out with Odyssey and then changed names to just being the Stephen A. Smith Show, and then now it's with iHeart. So maybe when that expires, it could kind of become part of this. But it sounds like that would mean more money for him. And that's like one of my big takeaways is this dude is making an absolute ton of money and has outs and opportunities to make even more. And so where I come down, because of the vagueness, and maybe there will be more details that we can definitely cover if they come out, Ben, that make this make a little more sense. But I wanted to throw this at you, which is that if the majority of this deal is still just for him hosting First Take, which is the show he does, whose name we haven't even said yet, can you make any case that Stephen A. Smith is worth a contract like this for First Take alone? And a reminder, he is a producer on that show, and there's been rumors that on the deal he's currently on, which will end next year, he's getting paid some money to produce First Take. But still, that's a reach to imagine that First Take is worth this to them.
Yeah, I don't know the finances of like how much ad revenue First Take brings in. I don't think a deal like this is ever going to be about, is he worth it from a pure dollars and cents standpoint? Like, are we making back what we're getting on the pure like transactional nature of his TV show? I think there's kind of that unspoken like Woj a little bit when we talked about when ESPN brought in Woj, and it wasn't just what he brings in terms of breaking news, because he's breaking most of his news on Twitter, which ESPN isn't making any money on, but there's some sort of prestige about Stephen A. Smith has established himself as one of the top stars in media, if not the top star in sports media. And we want him under the ESPN banner. And I mean, there is, Sunday countdown, but our NBA countdown, but the need for that has kind of been mitigated with the leasing of Inside the NBA. But on First Take alone, like, no, especially because I don't know how much longer his future is on First Take. I mean, he has hinted that he is not long for First Take. And I don't know where that fits into this deal. But no, I don't think you can look at this as exclusive to First Take. I think it's about the value in the alleged prestige of having Stephen A. Smith, being one of the signature stars of your network, because that's the ESPN model right now.
Yeah, it's almost they're paying to continue to have him introduced on his own show, on the various appearances he does, on the empire he continues to expand as being ESPN's Stephen A. Smith, the host of First Take, right? It's like, it's I don't want to reduce his talent or his appeal. He's a tremendously hardworking and obviously crazy entertaining guy, but there's a marketing and kind of brand appeal to, I think, doing a deal like this that ESPN probably valued. But yeah, until we hear more, it is very strange. I mean, we already questioned Troy Aikman and Joe Buck making the money. They at least do the biggest game on the whole network, right? Like, and they're doing a Super Bowl now as part of the new NFL media deal. So the idea of Stephen A. Smith being worth more for just First Take is extra mathematically confusing to me. But you mentioned what does this kind of look like down the line, and we've both been hinting at it. What do you feel like the next 5 years of Stephen A. Smith look like? I want to remind the people, and you maybe, although I don't think you need it, 5 years ago, which was about, I think, around the time that Stephen A. signed his last deal. I think that it was 4 or 5. He was hosting First Take with Max Kellerman. He was still doing daily radio every afternoon on ESPN airwaves. And in 2019, the biggest news that I could find about him stretching his wings out into other things was that he was doing fight commentary for boxing and UFC. So that was where we were in Stephen A. Smith land 5 years ago. What do you feel like the next 5 years hold with the new freedom that this deal kind of offers him?
I think they are going to take some chances. And I think specifically when it comes to the streaming, the over-the-top streaming service app, they're calling it Flagship right now. I don't think that's going to wind up being the official name, but that's going to launch next fall. And just, having listened to a bunch of interviews with Burke Magnus and Jimmy Pitaro, like, that's, I think, going to be one of the bigger stories of this next year is what happens with Flagship, because this is going to have to be one, they're like going all in with this over-the-top streaming service, this standalone ESPN app, and they're going to have to find a way to differentiate it from what they're already offering on ESPN Plus. Like, they're going to have to make this appealing in a way more than just subscribing to ESPN without having a cable bundle. And so I wouldn't be surprised. In fact, I would probably think we're going to get some sort of Stephen A. Smith late night shows, some sort of, maybe they take this Jason Kelsey show they're doing and kind of use it as a testing ground for what they could do with other talents. But I do think we're going to get some sort of separate Stephen A. Smith show aside from First Take, because I think that's what they want this app to be. I think they want to take chances on this app. I think they want to have unique content that you can only get if you're subscribing to the Flagship app. And I think now that you have Stephen A. Smith under contract for 5 years, like, that gives you some flexibility. Now, will the show work? Will it stick? I don't know. Jason Kelsey's show won't be the first sports late night show that's tried to make something happen. I don't know, but I think we will see them take chances when it comes to the Flagship and Stephen A. Smith.
So I think you're probably right. I mean, they should be trying that. I think you should expect that from Pat McAfee and Mike Greenberg and all the people that have kind of risen to the top in this kind of stars and scrubs balance sheet for ESPN. But the thing that makes Stephen A. incredible at what he does and the career he's crafted for himself to me is that he is so perfect for kind of the, what, like the least common denominator, what do you call it? Just the every person, right? Like everybody likes Stephen A. Smith. And that kind of screams free to me. Like, are there people who will pay money to watch Stephen A. Smith? Are there things about what he provides you? Because he doesn't break news. He's not really nitty gritty analyzing the game or giving you, an edge on betting, or you don't really, in my opinion, like, I don't know a lot of people who have brand loyalty to Stephen A. Smith. Like, I'm going to go where he goes because I have this deep connection. He doesn't really share a lot of his personal life in that way. He has a personality that feels crafted and sculpted even when you're watching him. So that kind of authenticity that we know online can make people really form that type of connection. That's not really there. I don't feel like I imagine a lot of people saying, oh, Stephen A. Smith has a paywalled show. Let me go get my debit card. That just, I don't know. He doesn't feel like the right guy for that to me.
It would have to be something where he leverages his star power and has like incredible guests, has engaging conversations. It would honestly have to be a little bit like his podcast right now. Like, I kind of think of all the Stephen A. Smith content that's out there, I kind of find his podcast to be the most engaging because I find it to largely be him in his truest form. He's still performative, but he's less, it feels less like a show. It feels less like over the top, Dallas Cowboys trolling. It's more authentic interviews, which I think he's actually pretty good at. So if you could find something like that does fit on the ESPN platform, maybe that's how it works. But yeah, like ESPN, Stephen A. Smith is not, you're right. I think you're right. Like he screams free. He screams like, this is the entry door to ESPN. This is what ESPN is presenting itself as. If you want to subscribe, for our NFL draft data or for our insider access, like that's one thing, but I don't know if like Stephen A. Smith giving his takes on the Cowboys, if that's like moving the needle to get people to subscribe to your streaming service. So I think it would have to be something a little bit more like the Stephen A. Smith show as opposed to First Take.
Yeah, my best guess if I'm building something out is that there is some kind of licensing agreement down the line between Disney and the podcast, that it appears maybe in more of kind of the ABC realm or on Disney Plus, which they're building out into basically its own thing now. And that type of content maybe becomes more part of what we associate him with. I wouldn't be surprised if he dips into news coverage on a more consistent and full-time basis elsewhere. I mean, that's the one thing about ESPN or about Disney is they don't really have like a go-to news cable network the way that like NBC and Fox do, where he could just go do something there. So maybe it just is on Fox News, or maybe it is as a partnership with one of these other kind of budding, more like centrist/conservative, digital networks or whatever that might look like. And maybe it's with one of his old buddies like Sean Hannity. But I those would be my two guesses beyond kind of the ESPN stuff that I think we can all predict. The one thing I don't need more alt casts. I don't need him. No. I don't need him talking over an NBA game. So if ESPN's listening here, let's nix that part of it. That's my prediction. But either way, he is making an exorbitant amount of money to do basically the same job he already did.
Yeah. So he got it right. He's the highest paid talent, I guess, outside of Aikman and Buck.
No, I think he surpassed Aikman and Buck. Yeah, so I think he got the top dollar. I think Aikman was 17 and maybe Buck was like 18 or something, or vice versa. Yeah. And Pat was around the same, but obviously his deal's a little different. So yeah, I think he swooped over the top of all of them. And you could argue his job has the least direct value to the network as far as dummies like us can define as any of those guys. So salute to Stephen A. He did it.
Yeah, get that bag. Should we pivot to college football here? Get some college football talk in.
A place I don't think Stephen A. will be found anytime in the next 5 years.
I don't know. You make more than $20 million a year, you might they might call you up to be a guest picker or something.
Yeah.
Well, both of our teams are in the college football playoff. Like, what kind of
not
odds
playing each other, which was in play for a minute there.
What odds could you have gotten on Arizona State getting a bye in the first ever 12-team college football playoff?
making it at all, probably you were what, plus 10,000
Yeah,
more. Getting a bye, I think you're probably retiring early, if I'm being honest with you.
it's wild. But anyways, so the college football playoff is set, and we know that thanks to ESPN's selection show on Sunday, the first ever 12-team college football playoff. And so we've been doing this now for, I think, 11 years, going back to the first ever college football playoff in 2014. And I don't think ESPN has ever really figured out how to do the college football playoff selection show. Usually there's some source of controversy, like, who's going to get the four seed. There's going to be a team on the outside looking in. And that's always going to be the case. I think, especially now with the 12 teams and the way they have it formatted with the automatic bids, like there's always going to be some sort of question. It's never going to work itself out to where we know all 12 teams going into it. And this year's debate was between SMU and Alabama, which SMU wound up getting the bid as, I believe it was the number 11 seed. But I don't know if you watched it or if you saw on social media. I watched it. I rewatched it. ESPN's selection show was not good. Like it just flatly was not a good product. It was not a good television show. I don't think they set the stakes of the debate between Alabama and SMU until the second segment. They launched the show and kind of just started arguing about SMU or Alabama. You had Kirk Herbstreit, taking swipes at Booger McFarland. You had Nick Saban campaigning basically for Alabama to make the college football playoff. And on top of all that, you had former ESPN reporter Brett McMurphy scooping the show and reporting that SMU was the de facto 12th team in ahead of the show. So I don't know. It was really, I don't think they've ever figured out this show, especially in comparison to the college basketball counterpart. But it felt like this year's show was especially disastrous. What did you watch it? What did you take away from this?
Yeah. So what I took away from it was that last thing you said, which more of a question. What should it look like? That was kind of what I was trying to wrap my mind around is, obviously some of the logistical aspects of it as far as who's on it, Herbstreit being on after not being on for the others and then being virtual and some of that I think didn't help matters. I did pull this, which I didn't know off the top of my head. CBS still gets around 5 million viewers a year, even in 2024, for their basketball version of this thing. So like there is an appetite. I think the energy on that show is awesome. There's a lot more uncertainty because of the 68 team field, as well as just not only is it way more up in the air, but also what region and where do my, like, people want to know. I'm going to go travel. I want to know where, there's just a lot more going on. So obviously that's its own thing in some ways, but I don't know, like, I found myself thinking a few things, and a lot of it, honestly, to me felt like stuff that I would think I would see in like a YouTube live stream watch along. Is like probably the best format for something like this in 2024, if I'm being honest, Ben. But I think ESPN can kind of do it better. And you mentioned a few of the things in your piece on Awful Announcing. One is, I feel like the setting of the stakes, like rapid fire through the biggest things people should be watching for immediately, then reveal the field like 10 minutes in, then just be reacting the rest of the way, right? And like you mentioned, they didn't bring Heather Dinich in until far too long after. Like, she should be up front. She should be immediately after. And then, like, I don't know. I think that there's just a difference in terms of who should be on the cast of something like this than a college game day or even a halftime show or something. Bring people who are going to embrace the absurdity and chaos and tribalism and anger that's going to, like, bring people who will speak to that rather than getting petty about it the way that I think Saban and Herbstreit might have done, and like a lot of people on ESPN unfortunately tend to do with this sport.
Yeah, I think it's a tough show because I think that college football is obviously, the most tribal of sports when it comes to the fan bases, and it's also the most subjective postseason. Like, you're literally having a committee pick teams, and so that's always going to lend itself to a debate. And not only is it a debate, but it's a debate between the most passionate fan bases in the world. Like, imagine if we had this for the NFL, which I don't even know if you can compare the passion of NFL fans to some of these college football, the blue blood programs. But if you had like the Dallas Cowboys, a debate about whether or not they should get in into the NFL playoffs based on subjective, arbitrary criteria, like
or
that
the
would be
Champions
insane.
League. You know what I mean?
Right.
Imagine
Yeah.
like Man City fans are rioting in the streets because some old guy said that their win 2 weeks ago wasn't quite as good as they thought it was, right?
Right. And so you can listen to all these fan bases. I mean, I listened to Lebitard, and if you would have listened to them the last week, you would have thought like, oh, Miami obviously should get in. They have the most clear-cut case to get in. And then if you would have listened to, I'm sure Feinbaum or somebody else in the SEC, you would have thought it was Alabama. And so I do think this is a tough gig, because I think shows like this are always going to come with a level of animosity that, even the March Madness show isn't going to bring, because you don't have as high profile teams, getting left on the cutting room floor, so to speak. But I do think like they have not found a way to manifest that in a way that makes for good television. I actually think they've done it in a way that makes for bad television. And I guess like the epitome of that would be Kirk Herbstreit. And Kirk was not on the ranking reveal shows this year, and it seemed to be connected to the backlash he got from vocally approving of Florida State not making it last year in controversial fashion. Florida State's one of the most passionate fan bases, spent all year coming after him. Kirk hasn't been able to let it go. He wasn't on the weekly rankings reveals, but then he pops up for the final rankings reveal, in which they reveal the bracket. I just think they should keep Kirk Herbstreit away from these type of shows and situations. Like, I think Kirk Herbstreit's good in the booth. I think that he's a star at ESPN. He does a lot of the things ESPN likes, but for as big of a role as these ranking reveals play in the overall college football ecosystem, I do not think they're doing Kirk any favors by involving him in them, because I don't think Kirk Herbstreit's cut out for this kind of stuff. I don't think he likes the criticism. I know he doesn't like the criticism that comes with it. And if that's the case, that's fine. Even if you're the top analyst, like, just stay away from it. This show would have been better without Kirk Herbstreit, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think some of the issues with the show are that ESPN is still so married to television, right? Like, some of the staging and the pacing of it is just not what people want anymore. And the Brett McMurphy thing is kind of like epitomizing that, where it reminded me of like the NBA draft and how Woj used to just tweet out the picks. And it's like, do the draft differently, adjust to the fact that Woj can tweet the picks, and we'll still watch. But if you keep pretending like Woj can't just tweet the picks, then we're all just going to turn it off,
Yeah.
But some of the other problems I feel like are, I do just come back to the talent of it. And like, I think Booger is perfect for it. You know who else I feel like would be really good is Robert Griffin. Like, I think him on a show like this, it kind of would be perfect. And it honestly, a couple of the things we're going to get to the rest of the show, like, go younger, think outside of ESPN maybe for some of this stuff. And I mean, they do it with the guest pickers. Bring some people who are diehard representatives of their school, especially as there's now more. It's not just four, and there's, kind of more to talk about, less just spinning in circles about the whole thing. Bring some random celebrity you didn't know was like a Boise State fan, or you know what I mean? Like, embrace the fun of it, because the who gets evaporated in an instant. And then it's just about, let's talk about the matchups. Let's talk about, what does this tell us about how the committee's thinking a little bit more looking forward? Or, this school had a glow up. Like, what does that mean? Blah, blah, blah. Like, to me, one of the interesting things is the whole idea of what we thought NIL was going to do is being turned on its head. Like, we're talking on a day where AJ DeBonsa in the basketball side goes to BYU, and you got Boise State with a bye. You're making fun of me for Arizona State getting a bye. Like, I would have loved to hear a lot about that. There's all these talking points that I just think kind of go away when the wrong people are there, and when you're so kind of focused on the buttoned up nature of, we're revealing something big here. It's like, but no, you're not. Like, move on.
That's a great point, because I thought the show is like low key, like 3 hours long, but everyone only watches the first half hour or hour, and then, NFL games come on. But for everything I watched, which was like 90 minutes through, they spent the entire time focused on SMU and Alabama. And yeah, they brought in Dan Lanning from Oregon and they interviewed some of the coaches and stuff. But like, I think you're right. Like, we're going to get a Boise State story every year. We're going to get an Arizona State story every year, a Clemson story. Like, lean into that. Lean into kind of the Cinderella-y March Madness type appeal of a 12-team format rather than just focusing on who was the last team to get in, because you know that that's where the source of criticism is going to be based on what you say. It just seemed like
and you know there's SAC fans watching and you want to cater to them or whatever it might be in the next couple of years, but that it just gets tired, to me at least, as somebody who maybe had a more like personal interest this year because I'm attached to one of those Cinderella programs. Yeah, that was what felt fun to me about it, is even I was sitting there surprised that they were literally calling their name when they did. So talk about it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and it made for all this, like, it's funny, Chuck Klosterman said something on the Bill Simmons podcast earlier this month about all this talk about college football. And we all talk about what's changed in NIL and the transfer portal and conference realignment. And we all say we don't like these things. And like, in your head, you can say that and you can formulate your take and you can say you don't like it, but we're all enjoying the games all the same. And in some cases, we're enjoying them more. I thought conference championship weekend was awesome, between the Big 12 game, which was basically winner gets in, and the ACC game where you had these like shifting stakes of, if Clemson wins, they're in. Can SMU still get in if they lose? And just the way that game played out. Like, I thought it was made for a really fun weekend, and none of that was reflected in the selection show. Like, and this should all, you're right. I mean, I think it should have kind of like a more of a college game day feel than this like really buttoned up, super serious, like, we're going to say things, but we're also not going to say them to the point that we get criticized by Florida State and Alabama fans. I don't know. It just seemed like a show. And maybe, and I mean, to be honest, I think this is Herbstreit kind of looming over all this. It felt like a show that was like too online, that there was too in its own head.
Herbstreitified.
Yeah, he was just in such a bad mood. It seemed like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world, and it was like being at.
And we don't know where in the world he was.
Right? Yeah, he was remote, so we don't even know where he was. But it felt like Thanksgiving, where like you have one relative who's just in a bad mood, and you're not going to be able to move on with dinner until this relative gets whatever he or she has to say off their chest, or until they go home for the night. And it just seemed like Kirk Herbstreit was very wanted to be anywhere else in the world. I really don't understand why they had him on the show.
His insistence on saying he won't do things and then doing them anyway and then getting mad at the response to doing them is exhausting to me, whether it's about college football or any of the other numerous things that he likes to weigh in on the internet. But I had one last thing to throw at you on this, which is a tangent that I think will get lost to time as soon as the games begin in a couple of weeks here. But the TNT sub-licensing deal, Ben, their games, we now know them. They're going to be ESPN talent and ESPN broadcasts that will just be on TNT.
ESPN made that very clear during the show, by the way.
Yes, and everyone who turns on the game and hears Dave Pasch and who's the play-by-play for the other game? Mark Jones.
That's right.
Will be very surprised, I think. But SMU Penn State, which will be in my backyard, literally. I live a mile from where that stadium is. And then Clemson, Texas. What do you think of the matchups? Do you think they're all going to be different year by year? But for year one, happy, sad, in between? What do you think?
Yeah, I thought they were good matchups. I thought that
I agree.
Do you mean specific to what they're giving to WBD?
Yes, the fact that TNT now knows those are the two games in the deal for this year that they're getting, right? I mean, I think those are pretty good matchups and big fan bases, big cities involved. I mean, it wasn't the top of the top teams, I guess. It's kind of mid-seed teams, but couldn't have asked for much more than that, I think.
No, I agree. I mean, Texas, you have like one of the blue blood programs in college football. Clemson, you have, a recent multi-time national champion. Penn State's been in the top 5 like all season. SMU's been one of the bigger stories of this college football season. I mean, I guess, no offense, but with Arizona State and Boise getting the buys, like it was going to be hard to find unappealing matchups in the first round. And
True.
so
That's true.
maybe these are, just what they decided was left over. They prioritized, Ohio State and Tennessee. And but I think, I think these are good matchups. And I think that, Texas could win the national title. That's not out of the realm of possibility. So I think that, all things considered, like it's a pretty evenly spread out slate of games here for both networks involved.
Yeah, interesting how they're doing the announcing teams, but obviously we can get to that when we get there. But they're kind of mixing and matching some people in a way that surprised me. But okay, finally, let's get to Netflix's NFL. They're calling it Christmas Game Day. Throughout all of Christmas Day, 2 games, obviously, we've known for a long time: Chiefs and Steelers, Ravens and Texans. Do we want to go game by game, Ben, or do we want to go booth, studio, sideline, that way down the whole lineup? What do you have the strongest opinions about? Maybe let's start there.
My strongest opinions are on the studio show. I thought that was really fascinating, the way that came together.
So, Kay Adams of formerly Good Morning Football now has her own FanDuel Network or FanDuel TV show. She will be in Los Angeles with Robert Griffin III, who I said would come up, Mina Kimes, Drew Brees, who we talked about at length a couple of weeks ago when he was on Monday Night Countdown, as his rehabilitation in NFL media and in football media kind of continues, and then Manti Te'o, who is on NBC most often, and mostly their college stuff, right? Am I remembering his role correctly? I mean, he typically does some of their Big Ten studio stuff, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so mixing and matching some college and some NFL, but big names. Big names is, I think, clearly the through line with everything we're going to talk about. And then this got kind of tucked away, which is that Laura Rutledge and the McCourty brothers are going to be doing something from Pittsburgh. So I was a little confused why they have the LA group. And then also Breeze is going to be splitting time doing international with Scott Hansen. So I feel like we're going to obviously talk about this when the day comes, but I still have some questions. Why does Houston not get its own studio thing, but Pittsburgh does, and whatever. But that's the group. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, maybe that's because I think the Pittsburgh Kansas City game is first, right? So maybe there's something with it airing first where they want to have, I don't know, boots on the ground or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
but
I not exactly. I mean, not exactly like they're not really related to that game, the McCourty brothers, nor are they like huge names. I mean, people may know them because they do have roles elsewhere. But anyway, I think the LA one is clearly the bigger headline here.
Yeah, and I think it's a pretty good booth. I think that or studio show, I should say. I mean, Kay Adams has a very high approval rating. Mina Kimes is well established as one of ESPN's top NFL analysts. And then I thought it was interesting, kind of the way they're using it as a kind of proving ground type of platform where, this is RG3's first big assignment since getting fired by ESPN. You have Drew Brees in there trying to rehabilitate his image as far as being a NFL media personality after the disastrous start at NBC. You have Manti Te'o, who's kind of a rising star, has been doing stuff for NFL Network this year too. And so I thought it was interesting with the way they kind of mixed and matched. Everyone kind of has different roles, but they also overlap to varying degrees. And I think, I'm not like the biggest RG3 fan, but I think that with the right pairings in here, like I think this could be a pretty good group. And I think just the way they went about it, the fact that they are getting all this ESPN talent and that they are also, throwing guys like Breeze and RG3 in there, like I think it kind of speaks to Netflix's power and that Netflix is this, this isn't Amazon getting Thursday Night Football and getting a bunch of bad matchups initially. This is Netflix. Like this is going to be a big deal. Like the Netflix Christmas Day games for the next 3 years are going to be a big deal. And they want to have the talent in the booth and in the studio shows that's going to reflect it.
Yeah, I think celebrity status is clearly the focus here, and they primarily pulled from ESPN, CBS, and NFL Network. There are a few exceptions to that here and there, but we know CBS is doing the technical production of the game, so that wasn't a surprise. Obviously, the NFL Network is a no brainer considering it's the NFL, but the ESPN names did surprise me. I think Mina Kimes being involved here, and even Laura Rutledge, and those was a surprise. The chemistry is going to be hard to come by in one day, right? These people have never worked together. We know that studio shows are made or broken by how much these people kind of get along and can do that. And that's what, makes NFL Live so good and Monday Night Countdown so good. So that might be hit or miss, but I like the mix of personality and X's and O's, especially because these people are going to be on the air for a long freaking time. They're going to be pregame, halftime, post into pre, and then halftime, and then postgame again all day long. So they got to have a good mix, and they got to have people who know what they're doing. They can't try out a bunch of new people just because it sounds fun or interesting, or they want to be, hey, we'd like to hire them whenever we get a full package. They kind of had to do it this way. So I'm excited. I'm looking forward to watching it in a way that I wasn't sure I would be.
Yeah, and I'm not somebody who I think if you ask me what's my favorite NFL studio show on Sunday, I would say probably, I guess, ESPN, but I'm not somebody who has strong allegiances to studio shows. I don't think about them in those terms, but I'm excited to see this one. And you mentioned the chemistry.
I mean, if this one was on a Sunday, everybody would be watching it, right? I mean, put it that way.
Well, and that's why I'm not too concerned about the chemistry, actually, because I had the same thought as I was kind of piecing it together. Is these are not people who take themselves too seriously. Kay Adams does not take herself super seriously. Mina Kimes can laugh at herself. RG3 is always making jokes. This is, I think probably Drew Brees is the one who stands out, and even he has kind of lightened up post NBC, because I think he realized that was probably one of the things that was holding him back. And so I think this is actually a great fit for him to kind of helicopter into. But I would be stunned if the chemistry was really bad. It's always a concern, and you never know until you truly do. But if you were going to make an approach where you were going to say, hey, we have to throw this booth together in short order. I keep calling it a booth, this studio show together in short order. How can we make sure we have okay chemistry? These are the type of personalities I would be targeting.
And Kay Adams, as you mentioned, but just to emphasize, you couldn't pick a better host if you want a natural environment. It's also Christmas. They don't want it to be so, maybe they could have tried to get Greeny or SVP. I honestly think Kay, for this, what they seem to be going for here, and the fact that it is Netflix and they keep promising to us that it's going to have a different feel, she seems like a pretty smart way to go if you're going to do it that way. So it all makes a lot of sense to me. Let's just go through the other things, because I put it together here as a reminder to everybody. Chiefs Steelers, the booth will be Noah Eagle, Nate Burleson, and JJ Watt. So that one is a little bit more of like a trial run, a little bit of let's see what these guys can do. I'm not sure if JJ Watt has ever called a game of any kind. Burleson,
not that I recall,
did earlier at his CBS tenure, and he's done the Nickelodeon stuff with Noah Eagle, so they'll have some chemistry, but JJ Watt will be new there, so that'll be interesting. Also, arguably, the bigger game. So then we go to on the other game, which is Ravens at Texans, Ian Eagle and Greg Olsen, where you're hearing a lot of the sports media insider types already speculate that a lot of executives are going to be watching that booth and thinking, hey, maybe we just go ahead and take that one for ourselves here. Probably Amazon. Go back to our friend Kirk from the last segment, and Ian Eagle's kind of already the next guy replacing Al Michaels. I wouldn't be surprised if Amazon was closely watching how Greg Olsen performed with Ian Eagle. But any thoughts on those?
Yeah, I mean, Ian Eagle and Greg Olsen could call a Super Bowl. I mean, without having heard them, that is.
I might want them to call this one.
Right? Yeah, I might be with you there. Yeah, I mean that's what stands out is I think you're right, that pairing. I do wonder, I mean, look, it's funny because I think 2 weeks ago we were talking about it's do or die for Netflix in terms of the technical aspect of all this. But if this works, and if you're able to air the games properly, they've set up where this could be a home run. Like this could be like everybody's looking forward to the Netflix game every year, and not just because it's on Christmas. And that makes me wonder, like with the NFL moving forward, like will they find more ways to get games on Netflix? Because I think Netflix, especially with the WWE deal coming into effect here in a couple of weeks and coming off the heels of Tyson Paul, like Netflix is kind of signaling like we're ready to go. We're ready to get into the rights game. And so I don't know if there's a way. It seems like ESPN has already, cut off a ton of slivers of its rights deal to spread them around to all the streaming services and all its TV right partners. But, there's been reports about them talking about potentially going to a weekly international game and just making that international morning game like a fourth window of its TV package. And I think Netflix would be natural for that. There's been some reporting about, the CBS purchase and whether that could allow the NFL to renegotiate its deal there. And if it does that, maybe it cuts off another piece of the pie for Netflix. But like, I think this is setting up to where if Netflix could hit a home run, and if it does, I think we'll start to see the NFL have an increasing presence, not just on Christmas there.
I wonder if this could be the beginning of a CBS Netflix arrangement of some kind, whether it's,
that's interesting.
I guess CBS does have their own streaming platform, so that would probably complicate it. But yeah, very fascinating. They paid a lot of money. I think it was like $60 million per game or something like that, if I'm remembering. I remember 120 total. So we'll see. They've poked around at the NBA as well. So this is big, and this is it's kind of like one of those ensemble comedies they used to make, like He's Just Not That Into You or something, one of those rom-coms where just everybody is in them and you just tune in because your favorite celebrities involved here. Sideline in Pittsburgh, Melanie Collins and Stacey Dales, Steve Weish and Jamie Erdahl from Houston. Obviously, Beyonce at halftime in her hometown of that Ravens-Texans game. And then Ian Rappaport will be involved here, apparently, Ben, as an insider, kind of giving his scoops throughout the day on the studio show. Gene Steratore from CBS being brought in for the rules analyst side of things. And then Bert Kreischer and Nate Bargatze with guest commentary, and a tailgate correspondent is what Bert Kreischer is going to be. So but again, like when they said Netflixization of it and everything, this is kind of, I think, what we can expect. Both of those. Well, I think actually Nate Bargatze has his latest special on Amazon. Maybe he's coming to Netflix. And then Bert Kreischer has, I think he made a movie for Netflix. And so I think we'll continue to see more of these types of things as we go. Obviously, Beyonce has done some concert stuff for them, and the kind of Netflix family, I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see it feel like more of a network than just something that does one-offs. And maybe this is the beginning of that.
Man, they've got to nail the technical part, though. You cannot hype it up like this. NFL games aside, I mean, that's obviously the biggest attraction of all is the two games. But like we said it 2 weeks ago, like they cannot screw this up. Like this is their launching pad. This is where they're going to announce themselves as real players in the sports media rights world. And if you come into it with all this hype, with something that the play-by-play has proclaimed a Super Bowl caliber booth, and you don't deliver on it, like there's going to be hell to pay. It is not going to be whatever the backlash was from Paul Tyson. Like you can probably amplify that by hundreds of millions to what it would be if they screw this up.
We are going to talk, I think, about the Awfulies, our year-end awards here on the podcast before the end of the year. And I filled out my answers today, and worst sports media moment was the Tyson Paul fight for me. So I think, imagine the multiplying you're going to do if this thing goes awry in any way. And Ian Eagle's trying to welcome you to Houston, and his voice crackles and the screen goes to black, right? Like it's going to get pretty ugly. Let's close out with our hot mics of the week, where Ben and I each bring something to close out the show that caught our attention, we loved, we hated, or we just maybe wanted to talk about. I'll start us off here. So the news we didn't talk about from the weekend was Juan Soto going to the New York Mets for 15 years and $765 million. We both have cheap favorite baseball teams, so he was not in play for either of us, Ben, but that's all right. I wanted to talk about Colin Cowherd's coverage and takes on this topic because I think it's interesting. He gave a take heading into the weekend that this stars and scrubs kind of situation that baseball is increasingly finding itself maybe back in would be the better way to put it, because the Yankees dynasty wasn't that long ago, is a good thing. And he predicted a good decade for baseball, whereas maybe the NBA and other sports might dip. Baseball is on its way up, obviously coming off of that Yankees-Dodgers World Series. Then he kind of doubled down on it on his radio show, saying that, you know, nobody should feel sorry for any of the teams that didn't get Juan Soto. The fact that Steve Cohen, as owner of the Mets, is willing to go and spend like this is, on the whole, not only kind of like righteously fair or whatever, but also, like, again, a good thing for the league, and all things considered, a net positive. How do you feel about that? Do you think that Ohtani with the Dodgers and Soto not in Washington, D.C. anymore like he was for a while, or San Diego, but now with the Mets long term, and I'm sure there's other, Judge went back to New York last time around, and it does feel like they're kind of in this super team era for baseball. Do you think it's good for the sport? Do you personally like it? Do you think it matters to how popular this whole thing might be, considering it was at such a lull for the past several years? Where's your head at on this one?
It feels like the way it's been really for my entire life. And so I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because, I grew up in the 90s and loved baseball. And like most millennials, I've slowly grown less enthralled with Major League Baseball. And so maybe it's a bad thing then, because, I don't want to say that's been the driving force of me not following, but it does suck when it feels like your team is effectively a farm system where, you draft Francisco Lindor, and your owner literally tells you enjoy him because he's not going to be here, in a couple of years. And sure enough, that's the way it plays out. I do think some of it gets overblown because, we haven't had a dynasty. I mean, maybe the Dodgers will become a dynasty, but we really haven't had a dynasty since the Yankees in the late 90s. Right. So some of that gets overblown. And we've also seen, this blow up in teams' faces. We've seen the Red Sox, make terrible signings. We've seen the Yankees make terrible signings. We've seen it really hamper those teams. But I mean, I guess I don't have like the strongest take on it, because to me, it's just always been the way it's been in baseball.
I suppose. I mean, like the best teams have been dominant for long stretches. I think that's true. I mean, the one part of Cowherd's take that I thought was, a little bit too Cowherdish for my liking was that he tried to loop in the fall of the RSNs to say that's actually a good thing for baseball, because the revenue for those bigger teams will continue to be better and bigger than the smaller markets. And it's like, okay, I don't know if you actually believe that, but I suppose you're right. But Albert Pujols went to the Angels on his huge cash out, right? Like, I don't know, Robinson Cano went to the Mariners. Like, it maybe does feel like the past few years, the biggest moments in terms of free agency have kind of seen players go from small to big market in a more pronounced way. It reminds me more of like 20 or so years ago. And I guess I look at the World Series viewership from which we were all kind of talking about 2 months ago, and the biggest splashes were 2016, in a year where NFL ratings were down and all sorts of other things were working against baseball. And yet the Cubs being right there catapulted viewership up, and obviously the Red Sox thing for a while. I don't know. Obviously places like St. Louis and, Cincinnati or whatever have these big fan bases, but I could see a world where baseball has a little bit of a better star-making vehicle and a little bit more popularity if these teams dominate versus the Cardinals or the Guardians or some of these other teams that have been up there for the past few years, including my D-backs, who had the worst viewership of any World Series last year because no one wants to watch the Diamondbacks and the Rangers. Like, I get that. So I could see it.
That's what I was going to say too, is like, it seems like, every year there's this big question of, what's the World Series matchup going to be and what's it mean for the ratings? And a lot of people always poo-poo it and say, oh, it doesn't actually matter. Who cares about this stuff? But like, it actually does matter to a degree. Like it is, you'd rather have good ratings than bad ratings. And that all factors into your TV deal, and it's reflective of the popularity of your sport. So, like, I don't know how many fans like Yankees Dodgers made this year, but had a better chance of doing it than Rangers Diamondbacks did. So,
And their
I
postseason's so random that I think that
right.
that works against them, right? So like you could see the Mets and the Yankees and the Dodgers all win 100 plus games, and then you still get D-backs Rangers again, because that's just kind of how that sport works. So that is a kind of immovable force for them. But what's your hot mic?
Did you know Timothée Chalamet knows ball?
I am finding out more and more about just how much ball he knows the more that people dive in after his game day appearance. Yeah, I didn't before 3 days ago, but it would appear a lot of ball.
Yeah, so like it came out Thursday or Friday. I think my wife is the one who told me like Timothée Chalamet is going to be the guest picker on College Game Day. I think my first reaction was probably like a lot of people's like, well, how's this going to go? Like Timothée Chalamet does not seem like somebody who, would have a lot of strong college football opinions, would frankly know a lot about college football. We've seen this before. Like they get celebrities and you can tell they're coached up or they're trained. The ones who clearly, aren't as informed as the College Game Day would expect them to be. Timothée Chalamet gets up there. He just rattles off stat after stat. He doesn't only give like a lot of analysis. He gives, frankly, good analysis. He makes good picks. I think he was the only person to pick Ohio to win the MAC championship game against Miami of Ohio. Like it was kind of this moment that went viral where Timothée Chalamet is up there on the College Game Day set, just crushing it with his analysis. And then it comes out like, oh, Timothée Chalamet only follows 44 people on social media, and 2 of them are Bill Simmons and Zach Lowe. And so like
he also follows Frank Isola and Woj and a very obscure Knicks blogger who I really wish had told us about all this ahead of time, named Jeremy Cohen. Jeremy Cohen has 14,000 followers. One of them is Timothée Chalamet. So big Knicks head, and apparently really, really studies up on mid-major college football.
Yeah, it's one thing to be like, oh, I'm a sports fan. I follow the NBA. I follow, the Knicks. It's another like for Bill Simmons and Zach Lowe to be 2 of the people you follow out of 44. And so it's like, I'm sure you've been there. Like I remember very specifically once I was at one of my wife's friends' weddings. And so it was a wedding where I didn't necessarily know a lot of people. And I'm talking to another guy there, another boyfriend or husband. And somehow basketball comes up and we start talking about Bill Simmons and the Ringer. And it's like, once you're talking to somebody else who follows the same podcast and the same sports content as you, like you can start speaking this entirely different language and this entirely, like you can talk about this entirely different, multiverse of sports media figures. And so that's how I feel about Timothée Chalamet. Apparently there was something where like in 2010, Landry Fields, when he was a rookie with the Knicks, had some contest that Timothée Chalamet won, and he tweeted about it. Like Landry Fields, like, congrats to Tim Chalamet on winning my contest. And there's a picture of them together. Like, it's just this crazy, like, and I don't, this might've been AI. Was there a clip of Timothée Chalamet on Jimmy Kimmel talking about Bill Simmons?
I saw that. I didn't watch it, so I cannot confirm that it was not made by a computer, but I want to believe that he just really, really dives into $1 million picks each week. Yeah. That's what I would like to believe.
I'd like to think like he's like in his group text, like making jokes about cousin Sal, always forgetting about the London game. Like that's what I want like Timothée Chalamet's group text to look like. So yeah, I look, just,
these dudes spend a lot of time on set. I guess podcast listening being one of the major things that they do, it shouldn't be such a surprise, but I love that he's one of us.
This, like, we're never going to hear the end of this from Bill Simmons. This is just like such a feather in his cap.
I want this to end with him being on the Bill Simmons podcast. I feel like this is where it's going, but also Nick Wright tried to beef his way onto the Bill Simmons podcast like 3 months ago and couldn't even do it. So Bill seems to have an iron fist about who gets to come on these days. Maybe Tim doesn't get the cut here.
Could you imagine if Timothée Chalamet was on the Bill Simmons podcast and it was more Timothée Chalamet fanboying over Bill Simmons than vice versa? Like that would be an all-time pop culture sports media moment.
Yeah, more like Bill Chalamet needs to start a podcast and bring Bill on is actually probably the better order of operations with what that really would look like. But yeah, it was the mustache, the drip, everything about the fish out of water look of all of what was happening on College Game Day before he opened his mouth for the first time was incredible stuff. And then he proved us all wrong. So shout out. He can be Bob Dylan and he can, pick SMU games or whatever.
Yeah.
All right. Great hot mics this week. Those were good ones.
Yeah,
that'll wrap us up. Don't forget to follow along wherever you're finding the show. We're on all audio platforms. We're also on YouTube here for you every Wednesday. We also are publishing and pumping out content constantly at awfulannouncing.com, covering all this stuff day by day. And we're also on social media, wherever you are, on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all that good stuff. So check us out, and we'll catch you next week.